Hello, it's me again, and we're now reading chapter 6 of The Beetle Boy, Darkus and Goliath. Well, look at what I found. Pickering stood over Darkus. It's a spying boy. His face twisted as he scrutinised Darkus. I've seen you before, haven't I? He nodded slowly. Yesterday, in the street, you were watching me. Why? What boy? Humphrey said, still on his knees. What street? Darkus tried to protest, but all the air had been smacked out of him when he'd hit the floor, and his body was screaming for oxygen. His lungs felt like they were going to burst. What are you doing spying through our window? I gasped Darkus gasped, finally able to breathe. Cat got your tongue? Pickering sneered. Darkus's head was throbbing, and as the burning in his lungs subsided, he was eclipsed by a searing pain in his lower back. The beetles were no longer on the floor as they retreated into their cups. Darkus looked out, desperately hoping he hadn't squashed any of them. Realising Pickering's anger was no longer directed at him, Humphrey climbed to his feet and came to a stand beside a skeletal cousin. Speak up, or we'll chop you up and eat you. He smacked his lips. Pickering grabbed Darkus's chin. I know what you're doing, you nasty skinhead. Don't you think that I don't? His fingers locked around Darkus's jaw. You were sniffing around here the other night, weren't you? You're a thief. What? No. Darkus tried to shake his head. I'm sorry about looking through your window. I was just... You were casing the joint. Pickering tightened his grip. What? Humphrey spluttered. I didn't tell you this, Humphrey, but last week when you were out, I heard noises in there. I came in and scared away intruders. Really? Humphrey looked about in surprise. There was nothing much in the bedroom except for a mountain of cups and a dirty pink armchair the size of a small sofa that wasn't worth stealing. 2 of them. Great ugly men, dressed in black, poking about in that rotten pile of filth. Pickering glared at the mountain, his nostrils flaring in disgust. They were wearing face masks and rubber gloves because it's so dirty in there. Pickering let go of Darkus and advanced towards his cousin, tightening his grips on the axe. I hate living with you, Humphrey. Do you know that? I wake up every morning hoping you've died in the night. And you saw this boy with the thieves, Humphrey said hurriedly. He pointed at Darkus, trying to divert Pickering's attention. He was one of the robbers. I couldn't see their faces, Pickering stopped to think, but the 2 I chased away were men. This one must have been hiding. And now he's come back to finish what they started, Humphrey said. I'm not a thief, Darkus explained. Really? Pickering turned. Then explain to me why you were on my property, up my tree, looking in my window with your thieving little black eyes. He charged back across the room and leant over Darkus. It's my antiques you're after, isn't it? You're planning to steal my antiques. I've never seen your antiques, Darkus protested, scrambling back towards his shoulders came up against the wall. You expect me to believe that after you've just sneaked through a yard full of them? He grabbed Darkus's face. You lying little toe rag. Darkus squirmed as the man's nails sunk deep into his cheeks. Now what I am going to do with you, said Pickering. I know, Humphrey stepped forward eagerly. Let me bake him into a pie. That'll teach him. Don't be ridiculous, Pickering said, letting Darkus drop to the floor. We need to tie him up. Crouching down, Humphrey sniffed around Darkus like an excited dog. I'd have to skin you before I could put you in a pie, he grinned, because human skin is pretty chewy. Darkus went cold. He desperately hoped the fat man was just trying to frighten him. Pickering dropped his axe, left the room and returned with a length of rope and a kitchen chair. Sit on this, he ordered. What are you going to do to me? Darkus asked nervously. Pickering pushed him down onto the chair and tied him to it. Kidnapping is illegal, you know. So is stealing, Pickering turned to Humphrey. Pass me your cranberry sauce. Humphrey waddled over to the white bucket beside the door. Are we going to eat him? Firstly, I will make him talk, Pickering said to Humphrey. Then once you've got rid of that, his eye twitched as he looked at the filthy mass of insect life taking up most of the room. That thing, you can do what you like to him. Humphrey clapped happily. Now Pickering stood in front of Darkus with his arms crossed. You're going to tell me about the gang you work for and when they plan to rob me. Now you're being ridiculous, Pickers. Humphrey's face split into a huge grin. No one in their right mind would steal that pile of rotting junk out there. Pickering reached down and picked up the axe off the floor. What I mean is, Humphrey said hurriedly, it's more likely he's a spy from the council gathering evidence so they can evict us. Pickering's eyes shot wide open and then narrowed, and he considered this possibility. Then we definitely can't let him go. That's what I thought. We should make him into a pie, Humphrey said helpfully. I'll let you have him once you've got rid of the insects, Pickering said, offering his hand to his cousin. Deal, Humphrey grinned, shaking it. I'm not from the council, or a gang, or a thief, Darkus cried. I'm just a kid. I heard you arguing, and I saw the beetles, and that's what you would say, Pickering cut him off. We're not idiots, you know. He looked at Humphrey. Well, I'm not. He picked up a giant T-shirt from the floor and ripped a strip from it. Hey, that's my shirt, Humphrey protested. Really? It looks like a dirty old rag, said Pickering, resting his axe against the armchair and tying the gag over Darkus's mouth. Darkus pulled his head back, trying to resist, but the horrid rag closed over his mouth, smelling like a musty dead animal. It made him think of the maggots, and he retched. Now give me that tub. Humphrey did as he was told and prized off the lid. Darkus wriggled and the skin on his wrists burnt as he was trying to get free from the ropes that held him tight. He had to get away. Uncle Max was right. These men were dangerous. Pickering cupped his hands, scooping up a load of cranberry sauce and splattering it down on Darkus's head. It was cold and sticky, making him shiver as it dripped slowly down his back. Hey, don't waste it, Humphrey protested. That's good stuff. I'll get you some more. Pickering reached down for another handful. Now you listen to me, boy. This stuff, he held his hands over Darkus's nose. It's cranberry sauce, and it can't have escaped your notice that right behind you is a monstrous hive of creepy crawlies, full of millions of disgusting beasties that bite and sting and burrow and scratch. And do you know what they love to eat most of all in the whole wide world? Pickering smeared a handful of sauce across Darkus's face. Cranberry sauce. Darkus shuddered as the cold sauce oozed down his chest and his neck. Pickering pushed up his sleeves of his green jumper and rubbed sauce down his arms. Now, if you don't tell me who sent you to spy on us, he was nose to nose with Darkus, I'm going to let those creepy crawlies eat you alive. Darkus stared at Pickering. He supposed it made sense that these beetles would like cranberry sauce, especially as Henry kept a bucket of it in his room. Baxter liked sweet fruits too, but thanks to his beetle handbook, Darkus knew something Pickering didn't. A lot of beetles were vegetarian. First they'd mulch through the cranberry sauce, and then they'd burrow under your skin. Pickering lifted another handful of the pink gloop. Next they'll drink your blood and dine in on your muscles until only your puny bones are left. He pulled up Darkus's trouser leg and splattered the sauce on his shins. And there are some even nasty critters in there who eat bones. Pickering was obviously enjoying himself. So this is your last chance. He pulled down the gag. What do you have to say for yourself? I'm from next door, Darkers insisted. I live next door. Liar, Pickering replaced the gag angrily. The professor, who lives next door, doesn't have children. Darkus struggled against the ropes, but it was no use. Maybe you'll feel like talking after the beetles have stripped all the skin from your body. Pickering gave a horrible, simpering laugh. I wanted to do that, Humphrey sulked. Look, here comes a big, black, ugly one with a giant horn. Oh dear, he looks hungry. Darkus looked back and almost wept with relief to see Baxter crawling across the floor towards him. The beetle, his beetle, had heard him call. He didn't need a control test to know that Baxter understood him. He immediately felt braver, and the fear that fluttered across his chest calmed down. I'm hungry, Humphrey complained, staring at Darkus. A loud knock sounded at the front door downstairs. Who on earth could that be? Pickering stood up straight and looked over his shoulder like a startled meerkat. I don't know, Humphrey shrugged. Pickering grabbed his cousin's doughy arm and walked him out to the hall. I'm not done with you yet, he growled at Darkus, slamming the door shut. Darkus immediately tried to reach the knots holding his wrist together, but his fingers couldn't get a grip on the rope. A familiar weight pressed down on his shoulder as Baxter landed and then crawled to the back of his neck where his gag was tied. He felt the beetle slide his horn up between the gag and his skin, pulling at the cloth. He was sawing at it. After a few seconds, the gag slipped down and Darkus spat it out, gladly pulling in a lungful of clean air. Baxter boy, am I glad to see you, he whispered. Can you help me with the ropes too? Baxter turned to the mountain of cups and rubbed his hind leg against his Electra, making a series of strange chirping noises. Darkus hadn't heard Baxter make a noise like that before. He realised it must be what his book called stridulation. A sighing sound, like a sugar pouring into a jar, filled the room as the beetles emerged from their mountain and scuttled towards him. Pickering and Humphrey were still outside the door arguing. We can't let anyone in case they find the boy, Pickering sounded agitated. What if it's the police, Humphrey asked. The police? Pickering squealed. Why would it be the police? That thing the boy said about kidnapping being illegal. But we've only just done it. How would they know he was in here? I don't know. You go down and answer the door. Why me? What will I say? Something stupid, probably. Pickering made a frustrated, strangled noise. The persistent knocking came again. All right, we'll both go, Pickering declared, and Darkus heard them clomping down the stairs. He felt a ticklish sensation as the beetle started crawling up his legs. He sucked in his breath, unsure of how he felt about being covered in beetles, but soon they were climbing up his back, clambering round his neck, and scurrying through his hair. Shivers rippled up and down his spine as tiny clawed feet walked across his skin. Darkus let out a sigh as he realised he didn't mind them being on him at all. They were heavy, and it was like being buried in sand. But the feeling of so many beetles was sort of quite nice. He tried not to laugh as they tickled him and to keep still. He hadn't wanted to squash anyone. With his eyes closed, he was covered in beetles head to toe. He thought about his dad. You're not going to believe this when I tell you, he said to him silently. In seconds he could move his arm. He tested the ropes. Yes, both hands were free. He tried his feet, and the cords fell away. The beetles had chewed, burrowed, and cut all the way through them. Darkus got up carefully, spluttering a blob of cranberry sauce on the floor, and crouched down to thank the beetles who'd rescued him. He was delighted to see the gaggle of red giraffe-necked weevils amongst the hoard, and the fleshy, duty beetles too. But the most impressive beetle on the floor, by far, was a gigantic Goliath beetle, easily recognised by its black and white zebra-like markings. It stood quite still, its antennae barely twitching, and Darkus wondered if it was very old. No illustration in any book could capture how awesome these beetles were. Darkus touched his face. It wasn't even tacky. The beetles had freed him and given him a wash. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're all amazing." Outside, the streetlight flickered on, casting a yellow glow into the room. Must be nearly 6 o'clock. Uncle Max would soon be home. Darkus heard voices downstairs. Pickering and Humphrey must have opened the door. And suddenly the beetles were withdrawing, quickly like departing shadow, back into the mountain of cups. Something seemed to have spooked them. Only the Goliath beetle moved slowly. Darkus ran suddenly into the room and looked down into the street. The sleek black car he'd seen outside the museum was parked across the road. A shock of fear gripped his stomach. Lucretta Cutter was here. But why? He looked over his shoulder at the mountain and the realisation hit him. It was full of spectacular beetles. Lucretta Cutter must be interested in beetles, or she wouldn't sponsor the Natural History Museum's collection. And that unsettling yellow ladybird he'd seen this morning was something to do with her. Uncle Max clearly thought so. Lucretta Cutter would only be here for one reason, for the beetles. But how did she know they were even here? He remembered what Pickering had said about the two men dressed in black and wearing face masks and rubber gloves. Did they work for her? Darkus crouched down on his back, with his back against the giant pink armchair, and powered his heels into the floor as he pushed against it with all his strength, budging it jerkily across the floor. It was a heavy piece of furniture and wider than the doorframe. He wedged it up against the closed door under the handle, and then he turned back to his mountain. "Listen," he said urgently. "You're all in terrible danger. Lucretta Cutter is here. She's bad news. I don't know what she wants, but..." He thought about all the beetles in the drawers with pins through them. "I think if she sees you, she'll want to kill you. Do you understand? You mustn't let her get in here." He scooped up Baxter. "We have to go, but we'll be back, I promise." Darkus ran to the window ledge, throwing Baxter into the air as he jumped out towards the sycamore tree. He caught hold of the first branch, dropped it down to the one below and swung to the ground, landing in a crouch as Baxter glided down to settle on his shoulder.